You need to understand something before this story goes any further. The boy never said a word. Not when he crossed 40 feet of gravel in bare feet, still damp from a creek somewhere behind the VFW hall. Not when he climbed onto the seat of a motorcycle that could have swallowed him whole, the chrome hot enough in the August evening to blister skin that wasn't calloused yet. Not when he set 2 dog tags down on the leather, careful, the way a person sets down something they've decided they can no longer carry alone. And not when he turned and walked back into a crowd of pulled pork sandwiches and folding chairs and a flag hanging dead still in air too thick to move it, and disappeared. If you were standing in that gravel lot outside Black Ridge, Ohio, on that particular Saturday, you would have missed it. Most people did. The rider almost did too. He was 40 yards away, talking to a man about a carburetor, and it was only the shift of light off metal that turned his head. By the time he crossed back to his bike, the boy was gone, folded into the crowd like he'd never been separate from it. What was left was 2 tags on a stitched leather seat, warm from a stranger's palm, stamped with a name that meant nothing to the rider yet and would mean everything by the end of the night. Stay with this one. By the time it's over, you'll understand why 67 men on motorcycles rode into a town most maps don't bother naming, and why a 9-year-old boy who hadn't spoken a full sentence to an adult in months finally did. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop your city in the comments. You'd be surprised how many of you live an hour from where this happened. And stay till the end, because the last image in this story is the one that's going to sit with you. But to understand the dog tags, you have to go back 6 hours, to a morning that started like every other morning that summer, heat already pressing down at 7 a.m., the kind that turns asphalt soft and makes old wounds ache in men who've stopped counting the ways their bodies remember war. The rider had been up since 5, same as always, coffee black, radio off, the quiet a habit built over decades rather than a preference. He had buried more friends than he kept photographs of. He had a knee that predicted rain better than the local news, and a scar along his ribs he never explained to anyone who asked, which by now was no one, because everyone who'd have asked was gone. He rode out to the hall that afternoon for no reason beyond routine. A plate of food, a folding chair, an hour of not being alone in a house too quiet for a man his age. He did not know yet that a boy had been watching him for weeks. He did not know that watching was about to become something else entirely. The house he came home to that summer had once belonged to his mother, and before her, to a man he never met, his mother's father, who had died in a different war, on a different continent, and left behind nothing but a Bible, with a cracked spine, and a photograph so faded the face in it could have been anyone. He kept both in the same drawer where he kept his own discharge papers, unread now for 11 years, folded the way a man folds something he intends never to look at again but cannot bring himself to burn. The house had 2 bedrooms. He used one. The other held boxes he had not opened since a move he no longer remembered the reason for. There was a dog in the yard, an old shepherd mix with cataracts starting to cloud one eye, and the 2 of them kept each other's hours without much conversation, which suited him. He was 61 years old that August, though most people who met him guessed higher, on account of the beard gone fully gray and the way he moved like a man conserving something. He had ridden for 38 years. He had buried 3 riding partners, 1 wife, and, though he did not often let himself count this one, a version of himself that had existed before a spring afternoon outside a town whose name he no longer said aloud. The scar along his ribs came from that afternoon. So did the knee. So in a way that could not be explained to anyone and had stopped needing to be, did the silence. He did not consider himself a patient man. He considered himself a man who had run out of urgent things to be impatient about. The garage held 4 motorcycles, only one of which still ran, and he treated it the way other men treated dogs or grandchildren, cleaned it on Saturdays whether it needed it or not, listened to its engine the way a doctor listens to a chest. That morning, before the heat set in fully, he had wiped it down with a rag gone soft from years of the same use, checked the oil out of habit rather than need, and told himself, as he told himself most days, that the ride to the hall was just a ride to the hall. He noticed the boy first, 3 weeks earlier, though he would not have called it noticing at the time, a shape at the edge of the gravel lot, barefoot, in June, in Ohio, which even then had registered somewhere below conscious thought as wrong. He had not approached. Men his age learn that approaching is often the wrong instinct, that stillness invites what movement chases away. He had simply kept coming back to the same lot, on the same afternoons, and let whatever was watching him decide, in its own time, what it wanted. The second week, the shape had a shadow that moved differently than the others in the lot. Not toward the hall, where the old men gathered on folding chairs to trade the same three wars in quieter and quieter voices. Not toward the road, where the heat came up off the asphalt in visible ribbons by 10 in the morning, toward the bikes. He had watched it happen from the diner window across the street, a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, and had felt something in his chest tighten that he did not have a ready name for. The boy walked the row of parked motorcycles the way a man might walk a fence line, checking each post without seeming to check it, and stopped longest at the one that belonged to no one currently living, an old shovelhead that a member named Dutch had left to the club when the cancer took him in March. The boy did not touch that one, he only stood near it, the way people stand near graves. By the third week, he had started leaving earlier than he needed to, and staying later, and telling himself both were coincidence. He noticed the boy's clothes did not change, not in any way that suggested a wardrobe, the same faded green shirt, the same shorts gone thin at the knee, the same absence of shoes even as the gravel must have been holding the day's heat long after the sun had softened. He noticed the boy watched hands more than faces, watched what men did with their hands when they idled near their machines, the habitual motions, the wiping, the checking, the small rituals of ownership and care. He recognized the watching because he had done it himself once, a long time ago, in a place with different gravel and worse heat, studying the hands of men who might or might not decide to be kind to him. He did not approach. He told himself this was patience. Some nights, riding home along the county road with the dark coming down soft and blue over the fields, he wondered if it was something closer to cowardice, a reluctance to know a thing that would then require something of him. He was 61 years old. He had already given the government 30 months of his life and both knees and most of what he used to believe about the shape of the world. And he had told himself, quietly, in the years since, that what remained of him belonged to no one but himself and the machine in the garage. He did not yet know the boy's name. 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 The arithmetic, when it finally resolved itself in the boy, took the shape of a Tuesday. The lot was emptier than usual, the heat pooled thick against the asphalt, and only 2 bikes stood chained near the propane tank, his, and a smaller one belonging to a man who came on Tuesdays to drop off flags for the honor guard closet. The boy had watched the other man too, weeks earlier, and had decided against him for reasons he could not have explained, except that the man's laugh was too loud and came too easily, the kind of laugh that didn't leave room for anything quiet standing nearby. He noticed the boy noticing this absence of loudness in him. It was not a comfortable thing to be noticed for. He had spent decades cultivating a face that gave nothing, a stillness that had once kept him alive, in places where movement meant a bullet, and now here was a child reading that same stillness, and finding, apparently, something to trust in it. He did not know what to do with being trusted by something so small and so careful. The boy's mother's shift ended at 11 that week, not midnight, a small mercy of a schedule change at the laundromat that meant the boy sat in the booth an hour less than usual, coloring nothing, watching everything. He had seen her once, briefly, through the plate glass, a thin woman with her hair pulled back hard enough to look like discipline, folding a stranger's sheets with the automatic competence of someone who had made peace with doing invisible work for other people's comfort. She had not seen him. He had not tried to be seen. That Tuesday, the boy did not come near the bike. He sat on the curb across the lot, 30 feet off, close enough to watch and far enough to run, and he ate a sleeve of crackers slowly, one at a time, the way a person eats when they are making something last, rather than because they are hungry. He looked up twice. The second time, their eyes held for perhaps 2 seconds, no more, and in that small window, something passed between them that neither one could have named. Not friendship, not yet, but the first thin filament of a decision being made on both sides at once. He thought about walking over. He thought about the folding chair he kept bungee-corded to the back of the bike, unused for years, and how it might be offered without a word, the way men in his old unit had once offered cigarettes. Not a conversation, just a gesture, a door left open a crack. He did not do it. He told himself there would be another Tuesday. He was wrong about how much time was left before the tags would appear on his seat, waiting for him in the morning light like a question he had not yet earned the right to answer. The Tuesday he told himself would come did not arrive the way he expected. A cold front moved through overnight, the kind that strips the last green out of August in a single pass. And by Wednesday the lot outside the hall sat under a sky the color of dishwater, wind pushing a single flattened cup end over end across the gravel. He rode out anyway, because habit is its own kind of prayer, and he parked in the same spot without deciding to, the front wheel angled toward the door, the way it had been for 11 years. The boy was not there. He noticed the absence the way he had once noticed the absence of birdsong before incoming fire, a silence with weight to it, and he sat astride the idling bike longer than he needed to before he cut the engine. He told himself the boy had school. He told himself a great many reasonable things, and none of them loosened the tightness that had lodged itself just under his sternum, a tightness he recognized from other waiting rooms, other doorways, other men who had not come back when they said they would. Inside, the hall smelled the same as it always did, coffee gone bitter on a warmer, wood polish, the ghost of 40 years of cigarette smoke that no amount of scrubbing had ever fully lifted from the rafters. He sat at the bar and did not drink. The bartender, a woman with a voice like gravel under a tire, asked if he was waiting on someone, and he said no in a way that made it clear he was. He thought about the folding chair again. He had not touched the bungee cords in years, had in fact forgotten the chair was there most days, a fact so at odds with a man who inventoried his gear the way other men said the rosary that it embarrassed him privately. He decided, sitting there, that the next time, and there would be a next time, he was certain of this now, in the way he had once been certain of weather before instruments confirmed it. He would set the chair up before the boy arrived, not offered mid-visit like charity, already there, already waited for. He left before dark, the wind sharper now, carrying the smell of rain still an hour off. He did not go straight home. He circled 2 blocks past the laundromat on Route 9, slow, engine low, telling himself it meant nothing, that a man could ride wherever he pleased in his own town. The windows were lit yellow against the coming storm, and through the glass he could see the shapes of machines turning, and no small shape waiting in any of the booths, and he could not have said, if pressed, whether that eased him or unsettled him further. The rain caught him 2 miles from the clubhouse, fat drops that came sideways off the flat fields, and found the gap between his collar and his neck, and he did not hurry, because hurrying was a young man's answer to weather, and he had stopped being a young man somewhere between one desert and this one. By the time he pulled into the gravel he was soaked through to the t-shirt, and the porch light of the clubhouse threw his shadow long and broken across the lot, and inside he could hear the low murmur of men who had nowhere better to be on a Tuesday night. He did not go in right away. He sat on the bike in the rain a while longer, engine ticking as it cooled, and thought about the way the boy's hand had rested on the dog tags before letting them go. Not a toss, not a drop. A placement, deliberate as a man setting a stone on a grave. Inside, someone had the television low, weather radar sweeping green and yellow across the screen, and a man with a gray ponytail and a knee that had not worked right since a highway outside Kandahar looked up when the door opened and said nothing, only nodded toward the coffee pot, which was the fullest form of welcome the house offered. He poured a cup he did not drink, and stood at the window with it, watching the storm lean the trees sideways, and when he finally spoke it was not planned. I want the chapter to do something for a kid. The room did not go silent, exactly, but it settled, the way a dog settles when it hears a car it recognizes. The one with the tags, the ponytailed man said, not a question. Word traveled through the chapter the way it always did, low and fast and mostly accurate. He's been leaving them on bikes, he said. Not just mine. I think he's been doing it a while. Leaving them where? Wherever there's a rider parked near that hall. He turned the cup in his hands, watching the coffee tilt and settle, waiting to see who notices. Nobody asked why a boy would do such a thing, because every man in that room had at some point in his life wanted to be noticed by someone who never was, and they did not need it explained to them twice. His father's name's on the wall in there, he said. I checked the roster tonight before I left. I served 18 months in the same theater as that man and never once crossed his path, and his boy put dog tags on my seat like it was fate, and maybe it was, and maybe it wasn't, and I don't much care which. I care that nobody sat with that woman since the funeral, if there was one, and I don't think there was. The rain hit the tin roof harder, a sound like gravel thrown by the fistful, and somewhere behind him a chair scraped back, and then another, the particular sound of men standing up because a thing had been decided before anyone said the words out loud. The one who stood first was the oldest man in the room, a patch holder going on 40 years with a knee that had been rebuilt twice and still announced itself with every shift of weight, and he did not say anything at all. He simply walked to the coffee pot, poured what was left into his cup, and drank it standing, which was his way of saying he was in this until it was finished. Others followed in the same wordless fashion. A man with a prosthetic hand from a highway accident nobody spoke of anymore began writing something on a paper napkin, and when it was passed around it turned out to be a list, dates down the left side, blank space on the right, the beginning of a schedule though nobody had asked him to make one. He watched them do this, and felt something loosen behind his sternum that had been tight since the boy's hand let go of the seat. We don't know her name yet, someone said. It was not a complaint. It was a fact, laid on the table, the way a man lays down a hand of cards he already suspects is weak, wanting the room's help in strengthening it. We'll know it by Sunday, he answered, though he had no way of being certain of that, only the particular stubbornness that had carried him through 18 months of heat and dust, and the kind of waiting that ages a man from the inside. Boys in that school district, there's one laundromat still running nights on the east side since the other closed. Ask around, quiet. Nobody goes near her like we're a search party, we go near her like neighbors. The rain had not let up. It came down now in long gray sheets that turned the parking lot lights into smeared halos, and through the fogged window he could see his bike sitting where he'd left it, rain sliding off the tank, the seat where a boy's small hands had set down the only thing his father left behind that could be held. He thought about the roster again, the way the name had sat there in block letters, like it had been waiting 17 years for someone in that room to read it and feel the floor tilt. He had not told them everything. He had not told them how long he'd stood in the hallway after finding it, hand flat against the wall, breathing in a way he hadn't had to manage since the desert. Some things a man kept for himself even in a room full of men who would have understood. The old patch holder set his empty cup down and looked at him. You said 60, he said. 60 men isn't nothing, but it isn't going to look like much, rolling into a laundromat parking lot at midnight. No, he agreed, and something in his chest settled into resolve, the way a bolt settles into thread. It isn't going to be 60. The old patch holder let that sit for a moment, the way men who have spent years reading silences let a thing sit before they answer it. Then he nodded, slow, like a man agreeing to a debt he hadn't known he owed. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist that hung under the sodium lights, and somewhere past the tree line a dog was barking at nothing, the sound flat and small against the wet dark. He pulled the phone from his jacket and did not call. He typed instead, because some things needed to be read twice before a man committed to them, and he did not trust his voice not to catch. The message went to the chapter president 2 counties over, a man he had not spoken to in 4 years, not since a funeral neither of them talked about anymore. Then to the woman who ran the women's auxiliary out of the Steel Cross clubhouse, who could get 60 phone calls made before sunrise without raising her own voice once. Then to 3 more names, each one a thread running out into the dark toward other men on other porches, with other bikes cooling in other garages, men who would read 17 words about a boy, and dog tags and a mother folding towels alone at midnight, and would not ask a single question before reaching for their keys. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen with the tags on the table in front of him, the metal gone warm from his own pocket, and he turned them over slowly, reading the stamped letters again, though he already had them memorized. Name, blood type, a service number that meant nothing to him, and everything to somebody else. He thought about the boy's hands, setting them on the seat with a care that had nothing of a child's carelessness in it, the way you'd set down something borrowed, not something abandoned. He thought that a boy did not do that once by accident. A boy did that because somewhere in him a plan had been forming for longer than anyone in that VFW hall had noticed. By 6 in the morning the phone had not stopped. 60 had become 71, then settled back to 67. Once 2 men called back, embarrassed to admit their bikes weren't running, and one more called in, already halfway there from Kentucky. He wrote the number on the back of an envelope like it mattered to have it fixed, like a name and a number were the only true way to hold on to a thing before it changed shape in the retelling. Outside, the sky had gone the color of wet ash, and down at the end of the road he could hear the first engine turning over, far off, low, patient, the sound of a man getting ready to ride toward something he did not yet know how to explain to himself. The gravel lot filled slowly, the way water finds a low place before anyone notices it's flooding. First one truck with a trailer, then 2 more riders who'd come the last 40 miles on back roads because the highway patrol out that way had a habit of pulling over anything with a patch on it before 9 a.m. He stood near the flagpole, counting them, without meaning to count them, the old habit from another life. Another kind of formation, men arriving in a rough half-circle that would have meant something different 30 years ago, and meant something different now, though he could not yet say what. He had not slept. He had sat at his kitchen table with the tags in front of him on a dish towel, turning them once every few minutes, as if the light might eventually show him something new stamped into the metal. It never did. A name, a number, a blood type, the same 4 lines 1,000 sets like it carried. But he kept turning them anyway, because it felt like the only work available to him at 4 in the morning, and because stillness had never once solved anything in his experience. Only movement, only doing the next visible thing. The riders did not ask him for a speech. That was the mercy of men who had spent their lives around silence and understood its uses. They gathered loosely, hands in jacket pockets, breath showing faint in the early cold, and they waited for him to say what needed saying, which turned out to be almost nothing. "Boy left these on my bike," he said, holding the tags up so the gray morning caught them. "I mean to find out why." Nobody asked whose they were. Nobody asked why 60-some grown men on machines worth more than some of their houses needed to ride across a county for a 9-year-old's secret. The not asking was its own kind of answer, the kind he'd have had trouble giving language to if pressed. A woman from the auxiliary brought coffee out in a dented urn without being asked, set it on the tailgate of somebody's truck, said nothing, went back inside. That was how the whole town worked when it worked at all. Nobody announcing kindness, everybody just doing the next visible thing. He looked out at the line of them, leather and gray beards and faded ink on forearms that had not been young in a long while, and thought that from a distance, to anyone who didn't know better, they would look like exactly what people always assumed, trouble arriving somewhere. He had stopped trying to correct that assumption years ago. Let them think it. The truth would take care of itself, the way it always did, slow and unglamorous, arriving on its own schedule. He swung his leg over the bike, felt the cold seat through his jeans, and did not start the engine yet. Somewhere behind him, a boy was still asleep, who had no idea 67 strangers were already looking for him. The engine caught on the second try, low and even, and the sound rolled out across the gravel lot the way thunder rolls before weather you can't yet see. One by one the others followed, a chain reaction of ignition that felt less like machinery and more like something waking up after a long sleep. He did not gun the throttle. He let it idle a moment, feeling the vibration climb up through his boots, into his knees, settle somewhere behind his sternum where the old aches lived. A man 2 bikes down called out an address, said it was where the boys' people used to live before the leasing office changed hands, before the rent went up the way rent always did in places that had nothing left to justify it. Someone else said the school bus route. Someone else said the laundromat on 5th, though nobody yet knew why that mattered. only that a woman worked there most nights and a boy sometimes waited in the booth by the window with a comic book gone soft at the corners. He pulled out first because that was expected of him, though he had not asked for the expectation and did not particularly want it. The town went by in its familiar order: the shuttered feed store, the church with the marquee missing letters, the water tower with a rust stain shaped like a continent nobody could name. He had ridden these roads enough times that his hands knew the turns before his mind caught up, which left room to think, and thinking was not always a kindness he did himself. He thought about a night in the sand when the man whose name was stamped on the tags in his pocket might have been 40 yards away, might have shared water, might have shared nothing at all but the same sky and the same fear dressed up as duty. There was no way to know. There would never be a way to know. And somehow the not knowing was worse than knowing would have been, because it left the shape of a stranger standing exactly where a friend should have stood, and he could not tell if he was grieving a man or grieving the version of himself that had walked past so many men without learning their names. Behind him the column stretched out long and low against the morning haze, 60-some machines throwing sun off their chrome in short, hard flashes, like a slow current of light moving down the highway. He glanced once in the mirror. They were still there. They would still be there in an hour, in a day, in however long it took. Somewhere ahead of them all, unaware, a boy was waking up to an ordinary Tuesday. The laundromat had not opened yet when they passed it, its windows dark except for the dull glow of a vending machine that hummed alone in the corner like something keeping watch. He noted the hours painted on the glass in flaking gold letters, the taped corner where a sign had once hung and been taken down, the single folding chair set just inside the door, as if someone spent long nights there waiting for a machine to finish its cycle. He did not stop. It was not yet time. There was an order to this, though he could not have said who had decided it, only that some old part of him understood that a woman working double shifts to keep a roof over her son's head did not need 67 motorcycles arriving at her door before the sun was fully up. That would frighten her. That would look, for one terrible instant, like trouble arriving instead of help. So they rode past, slow, engines lowered to a murmur that barely disturbed the quiet of the street, and he watched the building recede in his mirror, the way a man watches a door he intends to knock on later, memorizing its shape so he will not lose his nerve before he returns. The road narrowed as it left the town proper, flanked by fields gone the color of old rope, cornstalks bent and rattling faintly, though there was no real wind, only the movement stirred up by the column passing. He smelled diesel and cut grass and, underneath it, the mineral smell of a creek somewhere close but unseen. His hands ached faintly on the grips, the old ache, the one that came from 30 years of holding on to things. Handlebars, rifles, the shoulders of men being carried, the edges of a life that kept trying to slip loose from him. He flexed his fingers once and let the ache settle back into its familiar place. Behind him he heard, faintly under the engine noise, someone's voice carried forward on the wind. Not words, just the shape of talk, low and steady, one rider to another. It occurred to him that none of them fully understood yet what they were riding toward. They knew a boy's name. They knew a stranger's name stamped into steel. They did not yet know the shape of the thing waiting at the end of the road, and he found he was grateful for that, because it meant they were riding for the boy and not yet for the story, which was, he thought, the only way this kind of thing should ever be done. Ahead, the highway curved toward a stand of old sycamores, and beyond them, though none of them could see it yet, sat a low brick building with a flagpole out front and a plaque inside its door that none of them knew existed. The sycamores came up faster than he expected, their trunks pale as bone in the noon light, and he watched their shadows stripe the road in slow procession as the pack slowed behind him. Someone had told him once, in a different life, that trees like these had stood before the town had a name, and he had not thought of that fact in 20 years until this moment, with the engines dying down to a low idle and the brick building rising up out of the flat land, like something that had always been waiting there. The flagpole out front held a flag gone soft and gray at the edges, not from disrespect, but from the particular exhaustion of small towns that could not always find the money to replace what the weather took. Below it, a hand-painted sign read, VFW Post 4119, In letters someone had touched up more than once. He counted the trucks in the lot, 4, and understood before he even cut the engine that this was not a place with much left in it, that whatever waited inside would be modest, unadorned, the way most true things were. He swung his leg over and stood a moment before walking, letting the others gather behind him without being told to. 67 men and women arranging themselves into a loose half-circle, quiet in a way that surprised him. No jokes, no restlessness, just boots settling into gravel, and eyes turned toward the door. The screen door gave a tired creak when he pulled it open, and the smell that met him was the smell every post like this carried. Coffee gone bitter on a warmer, old wood polish, the ghost of cigarette smoke soaked into decades of paneling. A woman behind the folding table looked up, reading glasses pushed to the end of her nose, and did not seem alarmed by the number of leather-clad strangers filling her doorway, only curious. "Help you boys with something?" He did not answer right away. His eyes had already moved past her, to the far wall, where a row of brass plaques caught the light coming through a high window, each one engraved with names arranged by year, by unit, by the quiet arithmetic of loss that towns like this kept without much fanfare. He crossed the room before he had decided to. The other riders stayed back, sensing without being told that this was not a moment to crowd. His fingers found the dog tags in his pocket, worn smooth now from handling, and he held them up beside the wall as if measuring them against something. Row 3, third from the left. The name was there, had been there, he would learn later, for going on 4 years. He read it twice, though once had been enough. The letters did not rearrange themselves into some easier truth the second time. A name, a rank, a unit number he had carried inside his own service record, without ever knowing it belonged to a man who breathed the same recycled tent air he had, who complained about the same sand in his boots, who maybe stood 40 feet from him once during some briefing neither of them would have called memorable. He noticed his hand had gone still against the wall. Not shaking, still. The kind of stillness that comes after shaking, when the body finally understands there is nothing left to spend on surprise. The woman with the reading glasses had come around the table without him hearing her do it. She stood a respectful distance away, the way people learn to stand near men at war memorials, and followed his eyes to the plaque. "You knew him?" "No." She waited, because the no had not sounded finished. "Served near him, maybe. Same unit, different years." He lowered the dog tags from where he'd been holding them, but did not put them away. "Didn't know his name until about an hour ago." "Most people who come looking at that wall already know the name," she said. "You're the first I've seen come at it backward." He almost smiled. It did not quite arrive. Behind him, the room had gone quieter than a room full of that many large men should have been capable of. He was aware of them the way he was aware of weather, a pressure at his back, patient, waiting to see what shape this would take before deciding how to move. "How long's the plaque been up?" "Went up with the others from that class. 4 years now, near enough." She tilted her head, studying him with the frank, unhurried curiosity of someone who had spent decades reading strangers who wandered into VFW halls, carrying things they hadn't said out loud yet. "Why?" He turned the dog tags over once in his palm before answering, feeling the stamped letters catch faintly against his calluses. "Because a boy's been leaving these on bikes outside this building, for months, near as I can tell." He looked at her directly now. "Which means he's been walking past that wall the whole time, past his father's name, waiting on somebody to notice. It wasn't just old brass hanging on a wall." The woman's expression did not crumble, but something in it settled, the way a held breath settles once it's finally let go. "Lord," she said, quiet, more to herself than to him, "nobody told me a child's been in here." "Nobody noticed," he said, same as nobody noticed the name. He looked back at row 3, third from the left, and understood, standing there in that room smelling of old coffee and older wood, that returning the tags had stopped being the point, somewhere in the last hour, without his permission. The woman came around the folding table with the slow deliberateness of someone whose knees had been arguing with her for years, and stood beside him in front of the plaque, close enough that he could smell coffee on her cardigan and something floral underneath it, dime store perfume worn out of habit rather than vanity. She did not touch the brass. She looked at it the way people look at things they have walked past 10,000 times without seeing, the way a man looks at his own hands and suddenly notices the scars on them. I hung that plaque myself, she said, 11 years ago. Ladies' Auxiliary raised the money for the engraving. I remember because my husband's name is 2 rows up. She pointed without looking, an old gesture worn smooth by repetition. You'd think a person who mounted a thing to a wall would look at it more than once. He didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't sound like forgiveness he had no right to hand out. The boy, she said instead. What's he look like? Small for his age. Doesn't talk much. Watches everything. He paused. Doesn't cry either. Not that I've seen. Something moved behind her eyes, quick and gone. That's the kind that scares me most, she said. The ones who've already learned crying doesn't fix anything. She folded her arms, not defensively, but the way a person folds their arms to keep something inside from spilling. We get a little foot traffic through here on Sundays. Coffee hour, mostly old men telling the same 3 stories. I never once thought to look for a child. No reason you would, he said. There's every reason I should have. Her voice had an edge now, not aimed at him. This building's supposed to be for exactly this, remembering, and a boy's been standing in the parking lot doing our job for us. She shook her head, more at the room than at anyone in it. I want to see him, before you do anything else. I want to shake that boy's hand, and tell him somebody finally looked. Sully considered that, turning the tags over once more, letting the chain pool cold in his palm. He doesn't take to strangers easy. I imagine not, she said. But I knew his daddy's unit before I knew his daddy's name. That's not nothing. She reached out then, not for the tags, but for his forearm, gripping it briefly with a strength that surprised him. A woman's hand that had spent a lifetime folding chairs and hauling coffee urns and holding up a building nobody funded properly. You bring that boy back here, she said, and bring the rest of your people too. This town owes that family more than a bench and a good feeling. Outside, through the prop door, the gravel lot had begun to fill with engines he hadn't called for. He stepped outside to find out why, and the answer was simpler than he expected. Word traveled the way it always did in that world, not through phones so much as through the shape of a parked bike, the particular slouch of a man standing too long in one place, the kind of stillness that other riders learned to read from 200 yards off. Someone had seen his truck outside the hall, past the hour it should have been there. Someone else had seen the boy earlier, sitting on the curb with his knees pulled to his chest, and had mentioned it at the gas station the way men mention weather. A small fact passed along without weight until it landed on the right ears. By the time Sully reached the lot, there were 11 bikes lined along the gravel, engines ticking as they cooled, and men standing in loose clusters with their hands in their pockets, not asking questions yet, just waiting the way they'd been trained to wait, for orders, for information, for something to organize themselves around. He recognized most of the faces. A few he didn't, chapter members from Zanesville and one from Clearover in Wheeling, who must have been passing through and caught the frequency of it somehow, the way certain kinds of trouble broadcast themselves on channels only certain kinds of men could hear. He didn't call out to them. He simply walked into the loose half-circle they'd formed, and the circle closed slightly to take him in, the way it always did, without anyone saying anything about it. They found him, someone said. Not a question. Found his father, Sully said, on a plaque inside. He held up the tags, and the gravel lot light caught the stamped letters, and nobody reached to touch them, though he could see a few of them wanted to. Kid's been leaving these on bikes for months, hoping somebody would look close enough to notice what he already knew. Nobody spoke for a moment. Somewhere behind him, inside the hall, he heard the scrape of a chair, the low murmur of 2 voices, the woman with the coffee urn and the chaplain deciding something between them. Above the tree line the sky had gone, the flat gray-orange of an Ohio evening, sliding toward dark, and the air had cooled enough that he could smell the diesel and cut grass and someone's cigarette all at once, sharp and separate, the way smells got when a day had run too long. "So what do we do?" the man from Wheeling asked, not impatient, just steady, the way you'd ask a sergeant. Sully closed his hand around the tags. We go get the boy, he said. And then we go get his mother, and then we figure out what a family looks like when nobody's built one for them in 2 years. Nobody moved yet, but nobody looked away either. The truck started before anyone gave an order. That was how it worked in a chapter that had ridden together long enough. Nobody called a vote, nobody raised a hand. The moving simply began, engines catching one after another down the gravel like a held breath finally let go. He didn't watch them go. He stood a moment longer at the plaque, running his thumb once more over the raised letters of a name he now knew belonged to a woman folding towels at midnight and a boy who slept in a booth waiting for her shift to end, and he understood that the reading of a name off a wall was a different thing entirely from carrying it. The chaplain found him on the steps. She had the coffee urn woman with her, both of them moving with the unhurried purpose of people who had done hard things before and knew there was no use rushing the parts that mattered. You'll want to go easy, the chaplain said. Boy's spooked easier than he lets on. I know. Do you? It wasn't quite a question. He didn't answer that. He put the tags in his jacket pocket, where they sat cold against his ribs, and he thought about the 2 tours he'd pulled without ever crossing paths with the man whose name was etched into that plaque, and how strange a thing it was that the war could hand you a stranger's grief like it had been saved for you specifically, wrapped and addressed, delivered 30 years late. The lot outside had gone half empty of bikes and full of a different kind of quiet, the quiet of men deciding to be useful instead of loud. He walked to where his own bike sat, chrome dulled by the last of the light, and swung a leg over out of habit before he remembered he wasn't riding anywhere yet. The wheeling man pulled up alongside on foot, helmet under one arm, waiting. Laundromat first, Sully said, then wherever the boy's got himself hidden. Kids that age, they've usually got someplace close, someplace they can see without being seen. You know that from experience. I know it from being 9 once myself. The other man didn't push further, and Sully was grateful for that, the way he was grateful for most of what this chapter didn't ask him to explain. Above them, the sky had darkened to the color of a bruise healing, purple going to black at the edges, and the first sodium light over the VFW's door buzzed on, casting everyone in that particular flat yellow that made every face look older than it was. He started the engine. The sound of it rolled out low across the lot and did not feel, for once, like an announcement. It felt like a promise being kept, quietly, the way promises to the dead were supposed to be kept, without ceremony, without witnesses who needed thanking. Behind him, one by one, the others followed. The laundromat sat 2 blocks off the main strip, its sign missing the letter that would have spelled the owner's name in full, so that for 11 years it had simply read, Us and Suds, to anyone driving past at night. Sully saw the light before he saw the building. A hard fluorescent wash spilling onto the cracked apron of parking lot, the only lit window on a street that had otherwise gone dark and quiet at 9:40 on a Tuesday. He cut the engine a full block out, the way he'd learned to do outside places where a sudden silence said more than an approach ever could, and the others behind him did the same, the whole procession rolling the last 100 yards on nothing but momentum and gravel. Through the glass he could see her before he was close enough to see her clearly. A woman bent over a folding table, her movements economical in the way of someone who had done the same motion 10,000 times and had stopped noticing her own hands did it. A basket of towels beside her, a soda machine humming against the far wall, its light the only other source in the room besides the overheads. And in the corner booth, beneath a window fogged with the day's heat still bleeding out of the glass, a small shape curled against a backpack, sneakers off, socked feet tucked beneath him, asleep or close to it, the posture of a child who had learned to sleep anywhere because home was wherever his mother happened to be working. Sully stood at the edge of the lot longer than he needed to. He was aware of the others fanning out behind him without being told to, hanging back near the machines and the tree line, not crowding the window, not making themselves into a spectacle of headlights and leather pressed against the glass of a woman's hardest hour. Someone lowered their voice to nothing. Someone else put a hand flat against a fender, as if to keep the whole machine from getting ahead of itself. He walked to the door alone. The bell above it gave a small tired sound when he opened it, and the woman looked up with the particular flinch of someone who had spent a long time bracing for men to walk through doors uninvited. Her eyes went to his vest, his patches, the road dust on his boots, and something in her shoulders didn't relax so much as recalculate. "We're closing at 10, she said, which was not true, and which they both understood was not the real sentence. Sully didn't move past the threshold. "I think your son's been leaving something on my bike," he said. "I came to ask you about it. Not to take anything from you, just to ask." Her hands stopped moving over the towel in front of her, flat and folded, halfway to done. She didn't answer right away. In the fluorescent hum of the laundromat, with the dryers turning their slow, patient circles behind her, she looked like a woman doing arithmetic she'd done 1,000 times before, what this cost her, what it might cost her more. "He doesn't talk about his father," she said finally. "Not to me, not to anybody." "He didn't talk to me either," Sully said. "He just left the tags." Something crossed her face then, quick as a bird's shadow on gravel. Not surprise. Recognition, maybe, of a fear she'd been carrying without a name for it, that her son had a whole private country inside him she couldn't get to, and here was a stranger who'd stumbled across its border. "He's been doing it a while, hasn't he?" she said. It wasn't a question so much as a thing she was saying out loud to see if it would hold weight. "I think so." She looked past him, toward the window, toward the lot where the shapes of men and machines stood, at a distance she hadn't asked for, but seemed, now, to be grateful someone had thought to give her. She didn't ask how many. She didn't ask why they'd come. Some part of her, the tired part, the part that had learned not to expect help arriving on time or arriving at all, simply filed it away as one more strange thing in a night that had already stopped making sense the moment a biker walked through her door and said her son's name like he had a right to it. "He was 7 when it happened," she said. "Petey, he was 7, and I told him his daddy was a hero, because that's what you tell a 7-year-old, and I never told him the rest of it, because I didn't have the rest of it figured out myself." Sully didn't fill the silence. He'd learned, somewhere in 30 years of silences worse than this one, that the ones who needed to talk would talk if you just stood still enough. "There wasn't money for a stone," she said. "There wasn't money for a lot of things. I fold towels here till midnight most nights. He does his homework in that booth." She nodded toward the corner, toward the orange plastic seat worn pale at the edges, toward a stack of folders and a pencil worn down to a nub. "I didn't think anybody noticed him. I didn't think anybody noticed either of us." "Somebody noticed," Sully said. She looked at him for a long moment, the dryers still turning behind her, the bell above the door still faintly trembling on its little bracket from when he'd come through it. Outside, the wind moved low across the gravel, carrying the smell of diesel and cut grass and something like the edge of rain still hours off. "He's not here," she said. "He's asleep, in the truck. 3rd night this week I've had to bring him." Sully looked past her, out through the fogged glass, toward the dark shape of a pickup parked at the edge of the light, and understood, all at once, exactly how long this woman had been carrying something alone. He walked to the truck because standing still any longer felt like a kind of dishonesty. The window was cracked an inch, enough for the boy's breathing to reach him before the sight of him did. Slow, even, the sleep of a child who had learned to fall into it fast, wherever he was, because there was no telling when the next quiet hour would come. His head was against the door, his jacket balled beneath his cheek. On his feet, still, were the same worn sneakers from the gravel lot, the laces frayed to threads. Sully did not open the door. He stood with one hand on the roof of the truck, feeling the cold of the metal come up through his palm, and looked at the boy's face in the sodium light the way a man looks at a photograph he has been carrying a long time without knowing it. Behind him, the laundromat door opened again. She came out without her apron, arms crossed against the wind, and stood a few feet off, watching him watch her son. "He does this," she said, "falls asleep anywhere. Church pews, the floor once, right in the kitchen." A short breath, almost a laugh, though nothing in her face agreed to it. "He used to sleep with the tags, before you had them, under his pillow. I'd hear him talking to them sometimes, real quiet, like his father might answer back if he asked the right question." Sully didn't move his hand from the truck. "What'd he ask him?" "I never let myself listen close enough to know." She looked down at her own hands, red and cracked from the wash water, and turned them over once as if checking they were still hers. Some things you don't want confirmed. The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of the diesel and the wet gravel, and, underneath it, faint, the dryer sheets from inside. A smell Sully would carry for years afterward, without ever being able to say why it undid him a little every time. "I'm going to fix the stone," he said. "Whatever it costs, however long it takes. I can't pay you back for that. Didn't ask you to." She studied him the way people study a stranger's offer for the catch in it, the fine print, the thing that will come due later. He let her look. There was nothing in his face built to reassure her, just the plain fact of a man standing in a gravel lot at midnight, willing to wait as long as it took for her to decide he meant it. "He picked your bike," she said finally, quiet, almost to herself. "Out of all of them in that lot, I want to know why yours." Sully looked back through the cracked window at the sleeping boy and understood that he wanted to know the same thing. He didn't have an answer for her that night, and he didn't pretend to. He drove the boy and the mother home in her car because she was too tired to argue about it, following behind on the bike with his headlight cutting a single cone through the dark, and he watched the taillights ahead of him take the turns toward a rented house on the edge of town where the porch light had burned out and nobody had replaced it. He idled at the curb until she'd carried the boy inside, until the door shut, until the house went dark room by room, in a pattern he found himself memorizing without meaning to, the way you memorize the layout of a place you know you'll come back to. He didn't sleep much. He sat on the edge of his bed in the clubhouse's spare room with the dog tags on the nightstand, catching what little light came through the blinds, and he turned the coincidence over the way he'd turn over a part he didn't trust, looking for the flaw that would explain it. A man from the same unit. A man he never met, never bunked near, never so much as heard mentioned in 11 months of heat and waiting and the particular boredom that comes before the parts nobody wants to remember. And yet here was that man's boy, in a gravel lot 2 decades and half a country away, choosing his bike out of 11. He thought about coincidence the way men who've been shot at think about it, with suspicion, the same suspicion he'd once aimed at IEDs that didn't go off, convoys that took a different road for no reason anyone could name. Nothing that mattered ever felt random when you were the one standing in the middle of it. In the morning, he called the chapter together earlier than usual, before the bar opened, before the regulars filtered in with their coffee and complaints, and he told them what he knew in the plain, unadorned way he told everything, no embellishment, because embellishment was for men who didn't trust the facts to be enough. A widow working nights. A boy who didn't speak much and chose his words like he was rationing them. A grave with no marker 2 years after the funeral. 60-some men listened without interrupting, the way they listened when something in the room asked to be taken seriously, and when he finished, nobody reached for their coffee right away. "What's his name?" someone finally asked. "The father." Sully looked down at the tags in his palm, at the stamped letters he'd read so many times overnight he could recite them with his eyes shut, and it occurred to him, for the first time, that he hadn't yet gone looking for that name anywhere but here, hadn't checked the plaque inside the hall where 100 other names like it had hung for years, waiting for someone to finally stop and read them. The hall was empty when he walked in, the way it always was before noon, chairs upside down on tables, the smell of last night's beer not yet scrubbed out of the floorboards. He didn't turn on the overhead lights. The window light was enough, gray and slanted, falling across the far wall where the plaque hung between a faded flag and a corkboard of notices nobody read anymore. He had passed this wall 1,000 times, had stood at the bar not 30 feet from it, laughing at something, arguing about nothing, and never once crossed the room to read the names bolted into brass that had gone dull with age and cigarette smoke. It was the kind of thing a man walked past his whole life because it asked nothing of him, and he gave it nothing back. He crossed the room now. The names were listed by year, smallest print at the bottom, where the newest losses had been added, the brass around them brighter, less handled, less known. He found the year without difficulty. There were only 4 names under it. He read them once, fast, the way a man reads a speed limit sign, and then he made himself read them again, slow, letter by letter, because some part of him already understood before his eyes did. The 3rd name matched the stamp in his hand. He stood there long enough that the light through the window moved a little, sliding across the floor in the patient way afternoon light does when nobody is watching it happen. He did not say anything. There was no one to say it to. He put one hand flat against the wall beside the plaque, not touching it, just close, the way a man stands near a grave he hasn't decided yet whether he has the right to visit. The boy had known this name was here. That was the part that turned over slow and heavy in his chest, heavier than the coincidence itself, heavier than the 2 tours he'd have overlapped with a man he never met. The boy had not been leaving tags on some stranger's bike at random. The boy had been standing outside this hall, night after night probably, tags in his pocket, waiting to see if any rider walking in or out might notice the plaque, might read the name, might understand what a 9-year-old had already understood, that a man could be listed on a wall and still be forgotten by everyone who walked past it. He thought of the boy's face in the booth of the laundromat, the way he hadn't looked up right away. He thought, he wasn't leaving them for me. He was leaving them for whoever finally looked. He took his hand off the wall. Outside, through the prop door, he could hear the low idle of engines gathering in the lot, 60-some men waiting on him to come back out and tell them what he'd found, and for a moment he didn't move at all, just stood there with the tags warm now from his own palm, feeling the full weight of what the boy had been carrying alone. He walked back out into the lot the way a man walks out of a church he didn't expect to find God in, slow, careful with his footing, though the ground was flat and dry, and gave him no reason to be careful. The riders had gone quiet before he even reached them. That was the thing about men who had spent years reading each other's faces across mess halls and motor pools and hospital corridors. They knew before the words came. He stopped in front of them, tag still in his fist, and for a while he didn't say anything, just let the evening settle around all of them, the cicadas working the tree line, somebody's engine ticking as it cooled. He told them what the plaque said. He told them what it meant. Nobody spoke right away. One of the older men, a Vietnam patch stitched crooked on a vest that had seen more decades than most marriages, took his cap off and held it against his chest, like there was a flag somewhere he couldn't see. Another man turned and looked back at the hall's lit windows as though the building itself had done something to him personally. He told them about the laundromat, about the boy in the booth, not looking up, about a mother folding towels at midnight because pride was the only inheritance she had left to protect. He watched it land on them the way it had landed on him, not as information, but as recognition, each man measuring the boy's silence against some silence of his own. A father who didn't come home from a shift, a brother who didn't come home from a deployment, a version of themselves at 9 years old that nobody had noticed either. He wasn't looking for a rider, he said. He was looking for somebody who'd read the name. He said it plain, the way he said most things, but it did something to the group that no speech could have done. A few of them looked down at their own hands. One man near the back, heavy-set, gray-bearded, wiped at his face fast enough that nobody was supposed to see it, and nobody mentioned that they had. The club president, standing near the prop door with his arms crossed, finally spoke. So, what do we do with that? It wasn't really a question. It was an opening, the kind men leave for each other when they already know the answer, but need someone to say it first so it becomes real. He looked down at the tags in his palm, at the small stamped letters worn soft at the edges from years of a mother's hands turning them over in some drawer, or maybe a boy's hands turning them over in his pocket, again and again, waiting. We give him a place, he said, somewhere that isn't empty. Behind him, the engines kept idling, patient, 60-some machines and 60-some men waiting to be told where to ride next. The vote, if it could be called that, happened without a single hand raised. Men who had spent decades arguing over patch designs and road routes and whose turn it was to pay for the next keg simply nodded, one after another, until the nodding became a kind of consensus that needed no gavel. Someone mentioned a lumber yard 2 counties over that owed the club a favor. Someone else said his brother-in-law did engraving work, cheap, for veterans, no questions asked. The heavy-set man who had wiped his face said he knew a stonemason in Zanesville who could turn a headstone order around in 10 days if the money was ready up front, and the money, it turned out, was already ready, because a coffee can had been passed twice already that week, and nobody had bothered to count what was in it. He stood off to the side while the planning moved around him like weather, listening more than talking, which had always been his way. There was a particular quality to watching men organize themselves around grief. Clumsy at first, half the suggestions wrong, half the volunteers unqualified for what they volunteered for, and then, gradually, the shape of something correct emerging from all that noise, the way a fire eventually finds its draft. The bench came up almost as an afterthought, and then became the thing everyone agreed on fastest. Not a plaque bolted flush to brick, which anyone could walk past without seeing. Something a boy could sit on, something with weight under him, wood he could feel through his jeans on a cold morning, armrests he could grip with both hands, the way small hands grip things that feel permanent. The club president wrote the specifications on a paper napkin with a pen borrowed from the bartender, full name, rank, unit designation, 2 dates with a dash between them that would mean nothing to a stranger and everything to a boy, and folded it once and put it in his shirt pocket like it was something that could be lost if he wasn't careful, which it could have been, which everything important always could have been. Outside, the light had shifted the particular amber of late afternoon in that part of Ohio, the kind that made the gravel lot look almost soft, almost forgiving, and one by one the engines that had been idling all this time were finally cut, because there was nowhere left to ride to that mattered more than where they already stood. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It had the tags in it, small and warm now from being held, and it had the napkin in a shirt pocket, and it had 60-some men standing in a gravel lot outside a hall with a name on its wall that a boy had been waiting months for someone to finally read out loud. The bench came 6 weeks later, cut from white oak because the man at the mill said oak lasted longest against Ohio winters, and the engraving took 2 tries because the first shop got the dash wrong between the dates, too long, like it was trying to hold more years than the man had actually lived. The second try was right. Full name, rank, unit designation, 2 dates with a short, honest dash between them. They set it into the concrete themselves on a Saturday, no ceremony, just 11 men with post-hole diggers and a level, checking it twice because a crooked bench would have felt like one more small failure in a life that had already absorbed enough of those. The boy watched from the porch steps of the laundromat that day, arms around his knees, saying nothing, which by then everyone understood was simply how he spoke before he was ready to speak. He came to sit on it the following Sunday. He didn't announce it. He rode there on the back of his mother's borrowed car, walked across the gravel in shoes that had been resoled instead of replaced, and sat down on the wood like he was testing whether it would hold him, and it did, and something in his shoulders came down an inch that hadn't come down in longer than anyone could say. The rider came too, not because anyone asked him to, but because Sunday had become the day his week arranged itself around, the way certain hours used to arrange themselves around drinking, and now arranged themselves around a bench and a boy and a woman who had stopped folding towels at midnight because the marker fund, once started, hadn't known how to stop itself, and had covered more than a headstone before anyone thought to say enough. He kept the tags in his jacket pocket, the left one, over the heart, though he never said that was why. Some Sundays he talked, most he didn't. The boy had started talking more, in small, unhurried sentences, the way a person speaks who has learned that someone is actually going to wait for the end of it. Months passed the way months do when a thing has finally stopped hurting in the acute way and started aching in the ordinary way, which is its own kind of mercy. A year passed. The oak grayed the way oak does, weathering instead of rotting, which the millman had said it would. He never called himself family, out loud, to anyone. He didn't have to. He showed up, which was the only vocabulary the boy had ever really been asking for, back when he was leaving tags on parked bikes, hoping one rider, just one, would finally stop and read the name and remember that it had belonged to somebody. 67 had stopped. 1 had stayed. The bench held both of them, most Sundays, in a silence that had nothing lonely